Hot diggity.
Hallelujah, guys.
It's Mr. Creighton.
And Mrs. Klein.
We are here with your Lesson 36 podcast. It's going to be a combination, actually, of Lesson 36 and 37. It's all about the Reformation. You can start on page 505, and we'll let you know when we switch to Lesson 36, or Lesson 37. This lesson is The Reformation Begins, and the guiding question, what factors led to the weakening of the Catholic Church and the beginning of the Reformation?
All right, you guys, here are the vocabulary terms you should know. Denomination, indulgence, Martin Luther, Protestant, Reformation, and simony. All right, at the height of the Renaissance, Western Europe was still Roman Catholic, but this changed with the beginning of the Reformation. This movement led to the start of many new Christian churches that broke away from the Catholic Church.
The Reformation began in the early 1500s and lasted into the 1600s. One reason for the weakening of the Catholic Church was the humanism of the Renaissance. Many Catholics were dismayed by worldliness and corruption, which is immoral and dishonest behavior in the Church. These problems led to a number of Catholics to call for reform.
In this lesson, you'll learn about the factors that weakened the Roman Catholic Church and how a German priest, Martin Luther, ignited a movement that ended the religious unity of Europe.
All right, so looking at section 1, the weakening of the Catholic Church. By the late Middle Ages, two major problems were weakening the Roman Catholic Church. The first was worldliness and corruption within the Church, and the second was political conflict between the Pope and European monarchs.
Too frequently, church officials failed to live up to their role as spiritual leaders. People were also troubled by the way numerous church officials raised money to support the church. One method was the practice of selling indulgences. An indulgence is a release from punishment for sins.
The Church also sold offices or leadership positions, a practice called simony. Instead of being chosen based on their merit and accomplishments, buyers simply paid for their jobs.
Totally not cool.
Not at all.
All right, next we're moving on to political conflicts with European rulers. In the Middle Ages, the Pope became a powerful political figure as well as a religious leader, and the Church accumulated vast amounts of wealth.
As monarchs attempted to increase their own power, they frequently came into conflict with the Pope. In addition, popes became involved in other political conflicts, which prompted many to question the Pope's authority and also damaged the Church's reputation.
One dramatic crisis unfolded in France in 1301. When King Philip IV tried to tax the French clergy, the Pope threatened to force him out of the Church. The quarrel with the king ended under Pope Clement V, and in 1309, Clement moved his headquarters from Rome to the French city of Avignon.
An even worse crisis developed after Pope Gregory XI returned the papacy to Rome in 1377. When Gregory died in 1378, an Italian was elected pope and refused to move back to Avignon. A group of cardinals, most of them French, left Rome and elected a rival pope, leading the Church to have one pope in Rome and one in Avignon.
That's not going to go well.
Not at all.
All right, this division, you guys, in the Church is called the Great Schism. All right, moving on to section 2 about early calls for reform. By the 1300s, the Church was beginning to lose some of its moral and religious standing.
Reformers wanted to purify the Church, not destroy it. By challenging the Church's practices and teachings, however, they helped pave the way for the dramatic changes of the Reformation.
Are we going to find out a little bit about John Wycliffe? John Wycliffe was an English scholar who challenged the Church's right to money that it demanded from England. When the Great Schism began, he publicly questioned the Pope's authority and criticized indulgences and immoral behavior on the part of the clergy.
Wycliffe believed that the Bible, not the Church, was the supreme source of religious authority. Now we're looking at John Huss. John Huss was a priest in Bohemia, which is today in the Czech Republic. Huss sought to purify the Church, return it to the people, and end corruption among the clergy. He wanted both the Bible and Mass to be offered in the common language of the people instead of Latin.
All right, yeah, that's a big deal, this move to the vernacular.
That is.
All right, we're going to find out a little bit about another person. Her name is Catherine of Siena. She was a mystic, a person deeply devoted to religion and who has spiritual experiences. She and other mystics emphasized personal experience of God more than formal observance of church practices. This approach to faith helped prepare people for the ideas of the Reformation.
All right, now we're looking at Diederis Erasmus. So Diederis Erasmus was a humanist from Holland. A priest and devoted Catholic, he was one of the most outspoken figures in the call for reform. Erasmus wanted to reform the church from within and angrily denied that he was a Protestant. who wanted to break away from the Catholic Church. His attacks on corruption in the church contributed to many people's desire to leave Catholicism.
So there were people who were like, you're like, we don't want to break away, we just want to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, but that doesn't necessarily go very well. All right, now moving on to find out about Martin Luther. Okay, in the early 1500s in Germany, then a part of the Holy Roman Empire, a priest named Martin Luther became involved in a serious dispute with church authorities.
The church stressed that keeping the sacraments and living a good life were the keys to salvation. Remember, salvation means getting into heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Luther's studies of the Bible led him to a different answer. He believed that it was impossible to earn salvation because it was a gift from God that people received in faith. People, he said, were saved by their faith, not by performing good works.
Luther's views brought him into conflict with the church over indulgences. Luther was outraged because he felt that the church was selling false salvation to uneducated people. And he posted a list of arguments called theses against indulgences and church abuses on a church door in the town of Wittenberg.
He argued that the Bible, not the Pope or church leaders, was the ultimate source of religious authority. In the eyes of the church leaders, Luther was attacking fundamental truths of the Catholic religion. In January of 1521, Pope Leo X excommunicated him. That's a callback term. Remember, that means kicked out of the church, which meant he was no longer allowed to be a member in the church.
And he was a priest. It's not like he's like a regular everyday guy. It's like, sorry, buddy, you're not allowed. He's a monk, a priest. You can't be a part of the church anymore.
Yeah.
All right. And then for a time, Luther went into hiding, but the movement he had started continued to spread.
Soon, he was openly organizing a new Christian denomination known as Lutheranism, which emphasized studying the Bible.
Over the next 30 years, Lutherans and Catholics were often at war in Germany. These religious wars ended in 1555 with the Peace of Augsburg, a treaty that permitted each prince within the Holy Roman Empire to determine the religion of his subjects.
All right, now section 4, looking at other leaders of the Reformation. The movement started by Martin Luther swept across much of Europe. The printing press helped spread new ideas as well as translations of the Bible faster than ever before. Many reformers contributed to the spread of Protestantism.
Huldrych Zwingli was a Catholic priest in Zurich, Switzerland. Zwingli wanted Christians to focus solely on the Bible, and he attacked the worship of relics, saints, and images. Zwingli carried his ideas to other Swiss cities.
In the late 1530s, John Calvin, a French humanist, established another Protestant group in Geneva, Switzerland. Calvin emphasized that salvation came only from God's grace. He said that the saved, whom God elected or chose, lived according to strict standards.
All right, and then in 1534, we're talking now about King Henry VIII. In 1534, Henry formed the Church of England, also called the Anglican Church, and named himself as its supreme lead. His reasons for breaking with the church were personal and political.
William Tyndale, was an English priest, scholar, and writer who traveled to Germany and met Martin Luther. He attacked corruption in the Catholic Church and defended the English Reformation.
Tyndale is especially important to the Reformation because of his translation of the Bible. In the early 1600s, his work was used in the preparation of the King James or authorized version of the Bible.
All right, we are now turning the page to 515, so we're starting the second half, which is lesson 37, the spread and impact of the Reformation. The question, what were the effects of the Reformation?
All right, vocabulary for this lesson, you guys, is absolute monarchy, Anglicanism, Calvinism, Counter-Reformation, Lutheranism, nationalism, Puritans, and theocracy.
In this lesson, you will learn more about the movement called the Reformation and the Protestant churches that emerged in the 1500s. You will also explore the impact of the Reformation on the Catholic Church and on the history of Europe.
As Protestantism spread, it branched out in several directions. Each Protestant denomination had its own beliefs and practices. However, all Protestants had much in common, including a shared belief in the authority of the Bible, individual conscience, and the importance of faith.
The growth of Protestantism also helped to encourage a reform movement within the Catholic Church called the Counter-Reformation. The many divisions among Christians led to a series of wars and persecutions. These struggles involved political, economic, and cultural differences as well as deep religious beliefs.
The Reformation brought much conflict to Europe, but it also created many new forms of Christian faith. 3 new branches of Christianity that developed early in the period were Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Anglicanism.
All right, now looking at section 1 of the new lesson, Lutheranism. The first major Protestant sect was Lutheranism. Lutheranism began in Germany after Martin Luther was excommunicated by the Catholic Church in 1521.
Luther was a Catholic priest and scholar who taught scripture and theology, which is the study of religion at the University of Wittenberg. He was also upset about corruption in the church, especially the sale of those indulgences, you guys.
Catholics believe that people earn salvation by following the teaching and practices of the church. Lutherans did not believe that people could do anything to earn their salvation. Rather, it was God's gift, which people received in faith. People would be justified or saved if they sincerely believed in Jesus Christ, were sorry for their sins, and accepted the words of the Bible as truth.
All right. Lutherans rejected traditional sources of religious authority, such as church councils and the Pope, and instead believed that the Bible was the only true source of religious guidance.
Lutheran services combined Catholic practices with new Lutheran ones. Like Catholics, they used an altar, candles, and a crucifix, which represented the crucifixion of Jesus.
Other parts of Lutheran worship were different from Catholic practice. Prayers were written and spoken in German, not in Latin, so that everyone could participate. Instead of having 7 sacraments, Lutherans had just 2, baptism and communion, which Luther believed were the only sacraments clearly named in the Bible.
Now looking at community life. Over time, Luther preached less about the Bible and instead started to place greater importance on discipline and strong families. Unlike Catholic priests, Lutheran ministers or members of the clergy were allowed to marry.
Now we're going to find out a little bit about Calvinism. Calvinism was founded by John Calvin, a French humanist who did his most influential work in Geneva, Switzerland. Calvinists agreed with Lutherans that people depended entirely on God to be saved. No one deserved salvation, and no one could force God to grant it by doing good works.
Calvin maintained that God knew from the beginning of time who would be saved and who would be condemned, an idea called predestination. Good behavior indicated that a person was an elect destined for heaven. Calvinists had many strict rules defining good behavior. For example, singing, dancing, playing cards, and wearing fancy clothing were all forbidden.
All right, like Lutherans, Calvinists thought that the Bible was the only true source of religious guidance. Consequently, in a Calvinist state, religious rules also became government laws, meaning that anyone who sinned was also committing a crime.
Calvinist churchgoers attended services up to 5 times a week. Excuse me. Services included sermons that lasted for hours and that explained how to live according to the Bible.
Like Lutherans, Calvinists used only the 2 sacraments they found in the Bible, baptism and communion.
Calvinists believe that each community should be a theocracy, or a state governed by God through religious leaders. Calvinist communities had strict laws based on the Bible, and offenders were punished severely, and some were even banished.
All right, so that's like another way of saying excommunicated. You get kicked out. All right, now find out a little bit about Anglicanism. This Anglicanism was founded in 1534 by King Henry VIII in England. Henry was not a religious reformer like Martin Luther or John Calvin. Instead, he broke away from the Catholic Church for political and personal reasons.
Politically, Henry did not want to share either his power or his kingdom's wealth with the church. Personally, he wanted to get a divorce so that he could marry another woman, Anne Boleyn. He wanted a male heir, so he wanted a son, and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, failed to have a male child.
When the Pope refused to grant permission for a divorce, Henry took matters into his own hands and compelled Parliament, England's lawmaking body, to declare him the head of the English Church.
Anglican beliefs had much in common with the beliefs of the Catholic Church. Like Catholics, Anglicans believed that baptism washed away original sin. Anglicans, however, were also influenced by Protestant ideas and accepted Luther's idea of justification by faith.
Anglicans based their beliefs on the Bible, but the English monarch as the head of the church was the main interpreter of the Bible's meanings.
Anglican services were similar to both Roman Catholic and Lutheran services. 2 versions of the Anglican church service developed. The high church service was much like the Catholic Mass and very formal, whereas the low church service was similar to the Lutheran service.
Like other Protestant groups, Anglicans used only 2 sacraments, baptism and communion, and English slowly replaced Latin in Anglican services. In the early 1600s, King James I had a committee of scholars prepare a new English translation of the Bible, known as the Authorized Version or the King James Version.
King Henry VIII's daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, said that no one should be forced to believe or practice a particular kind of Anglicanism. People could choose how to worship as long as they obeyed the laws of England and they were loyal to the monarch.
All right, moving on to the Counter-Reformation. As Protestantism spread, the Catholic Church responded with a program of serious reform. It clarified its teachings, corrected abuses, and tried to win people back to Catholicism. This movement is known as the Counter-Reformation.
A major feature of the Counter-Reformation was the Council of Trent, a meeting of Catholic leaders that began in Trent, Italy in 1545. In response to Protestant ideas, the council gave a more precise statement of Catholic teachings.
The council's work brought a higher standard of morality to the church's clergy and leadership, while its statements of Catholic belief and practices helped to unify the church.
Many individuals and groups helped to reform the church and spread its message. For example, Teresa of Avila, a nun, started a new religious order in Spain and helped reform the lives of priests and nuns.
The Jesuits were founded by Ignatius of Loyola, a Spanish nobleman. The Jesuits were dedicated teachers and missionaries who founded schools and colleges, and they became the largest order in the church and actively supported the Pope.
The Catholic Church also fought the spread of Protestantism by condemning beliefs that it considered to be errors and by dealing harshly with those it labeled as heretics.
All right. To deal with heresies during the Middle Ages, the church had established the Inquisition. This body was made up of clergy called inquisitors who sought out and tried heretics.
In Rome, the Pope established a new Inquisition. The Roman Inquisition similarly sought out and condemned people whose views were considered dangerous.
All right, now let's talk about the effects of the Reformation. The religious divisions of the Reformation led to a series of wars and persecutions during the 16th and 17th century. Bloody civil wars erupted in many countries. In France, for example, wars between Catholics and Protestants between 1562 and 1598 left over 1 million dead. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. The 30 Years' War ended in 1648 with the signing of the Peace of Westphalia. A treaty called for peace between Protestants and Catholics. By deciding to control the territory, it set boundaries between Catholics and Protestant lands. This religious division survived for many centuries.
All right, now the rise of nationalism and democratic practices. The spread of Protestantism went hand in hand with a growing feeling called nationalism. Increasingly, people identified with their nation rather than with their local area or lord.
Along with nationalism, monarchs were also growing stronger. These changes led to what is often called the Age of Monarchs. Monarchs revived the old idea of the divine right of kings. According to this idea, rulers received their authority directly from God, and it established them as absolute monarchies. Yet, the Reformation also planted the seeds of democratic ideas and practices.
Some persecuted groups sought freedom to worship in their own ways. For example, the Calvinist Puritans fled England for North America in search of religious liberty. And by the time of the Reformation, Europeans had also embarked upon a great age of exploration. As they voyaged around the world, both Catholics and Protestants worked to spread their faith.
The religious divisions in Europe were repeated in areas controlled by Europeans all around the world.
All right, you guys, it's quitting time.
I'm out.